The first human diplomatic ship to reach the Valthran star system was not impressive by galactic standards. It was small, built for efficiency rather than display, and it carried only 12 crew members along with Ambassador Sarah Chen and her team of 3 advisors. When the ship entered Valthran space, the alien government that ruled there did not consider it a threat. They had dealt with many species before, and humans were new to the galactic community. The Valthran leadership assumed these newcomers would be easy to manage. Ambassador Chen stood at the observation window as their ship approached the massive space station that served as the Valthran government's center of power. The station was beautiful in a cold way, built from dark metals and decorated with lights that pulsed in slow patterns. It orbited a gas giant that filled half the view with swirling storms of orange and red. "First impressions?" asked her advisor James Park as he joined her at the window. "They're trying to intimidate us," Sarah said. "The size of this place, making us dock at the smallest port on the lowest level, it's all designed to make us feel small." James nodded. "The same playbook every powerful government uses. Should we be worried?" Sarah smiled slightly. "No, I've read every report we have on the Valthran system. Their common citizens live in poverty while their leaders build stations like this. That tells me everything I need to know about who we're dealing with." The Valthran species were tall and thin, with gray skin and large eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with a grace that humans found unsettling at first, their joints bending in ways that human bodies could not copy. When the human delegation stepped off their ship, a group of Valthran officials met them with expressions that showed no warmth. "Ambassador Chen," said the leader of the group, a Valthran whose robes marked him as a mid-level bureaucrat. "I am Administrator Keth. I will be your guide during your visit to our great nation." Sarah bowed her head slightly in greeting. "Thank you, Administrator. We're honored to be here and look forward to establishing good relations between our peoples." Keth made a sound that might have been amusement. "Yes, we shall see. Follow me. The High Council has agreed to meet with you, though I must warn you that their time is valuable. You should feel fortunate to receive any audience at all." As they walked through the station, Sarah noticed things that the Valthran probably hoped she would miss. The lower levels they passed through were dirty and crowded. Valthran citizens in worn clothing watched the human visitors with curiosity and something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. The further up they traveled, the cleaner and emptier the corridors became. By the time they reached the High Council's chambers, everything was polished and beautiful, but Sarah had already seen the truth hiding underneath. The High Council chamber was a grand space with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. 7 Valthran sat on elevated platforms, looking down at the humans who were directed to stand on a lower floor. The message was clear without words being spoken. The humans were being placed beneath the Valthran leaders in every sense. "Ambassador Chen," said the central figure, a Valthran whose robes were heavy with golden decoration. "I am Supreme Chancellor Doroth. You come seeking trade agreements and diplomatic recognition. Explain to us why the Valthran Empire should bother with your small species." Sarah had expected arrogance, and she was not disappointed. "Supreme Chancellor, thank you for this meeting. Humanity does not claim to be a great power in the galaxy. We are new to interstellar travel, and we have much to learn. However, we believe that mutual cooperation benefits all parties. We offer our friendship and our unique perspective." "Unique perspective," another council member spoke, her voice sharp. "What could humans possibly offer that the Valthran do not already possess?" "Fresh eyes," Sarah said simply. "Sometimes those who have been in power for a long time stop seeing things that outsiders notice immediately." There was silence in the chamber. Sarah could feel the tension from her own team behind her, but she kept her expression calm and pleasant. She had not said anything insulting, at least nothing that could be called insulting directly. But the Valthran leaders were smart enough to hear the edge beneath her words. Chancellor Doroth leaned forward. You speak boldly for someone in your position. Very well. We will negotiate with your people. Administrator Keth will handle the details. This audience is concluded. Over the following days, the human delegation began formal negotiations with the Valthran government. They discussed trade routes, technology exchanges, and the basic framework for diplomatic relations. On the surface, everything proceeded normally, but Sarah and her team were doing something else entirely during their time on the station. They were watching, they were listening, they were learning. James Park had a talent for making friends in low places. While official meetings continued, he spent his evenings in the lower levels of the station, talking with ordinary Valthran citizens. His translation device helped him understand their language, and his genuine interest in their lives helped him earn their trust. The taxes keep going up, one worker told him, a Valthran who operated a small food stall. Half of what I earn goes to the government. They say it's for defense for the good of the empire, but look around. Where does the money go? Not to us. Another Valthran, older and more cautious, spoke quietly. Be careful asking questions, human. The security ministry watches everyone. People who complain too loudly tend to disappear. James reported everything back to Sarah. The picture that emerged was clear and ugly. The Valthran Empire was run by a small group of families who had held power for generations. They controlled all trade, all resources, and all information. The common citizens worked hard and received little, while the elite lived in luxury beyond imagination. It's a classic authoritarian structure, Sarah said during a private meeting with her team. The question is what we do about it. Her advisor Maria Rodriguez frowned. Our mission is to establish diplomatic relations, not to interfere with their internal politics. Getting involved could be dangerous. I agree that we need to be careful, Sarah said. But look at these people. They're suffering under a government that treats them like resources to be used up. If we just sign agreements and leave, we become part of the system that oppresses them. The fourth member of their team, a young man named David Liu who specialized in information systems, spoke up. I've been analyzing their communication networks. The government controls all news and information. The citizens have no idea how bad things really are compared to other civilizations. They think this is normal because they've never seen anything else. Sarah nodded slowly. An idea was forming in her mind. What if we showed them something else? Not through force or interference, but through diplomacy, through simply being what we are and letting them see it. That's walking a very thin line, Maria warned. Yes, it is, Sarah agreed, but sometimes that's where we need to walk. The next day, Sarah made an unusual request during negotiations. She asked if the human delegation could host a reception for Valthran citizens of all social classes. She explained it as a human custom, a way of building friendship between peoples. Administrator Keth looked suspicious, but agreed to consult with the High Council. The response came quickly. The council refused the request. Common citizens could not be allowed to interact with foreign diplomats. It was not proper, they said. It was not safe. Sarah accepted the refusal gracefully, but she had learned what she needed to know. The Valthran leaders were afraid. They were afraid of what would happen if their people saw how others lived, how other governments treated their citizens. That fear told Sarah that beneath the surface of the Valthran Empire, something was ready to change. She just needed to find the right way to help it happen. The official negotiations continued, but now they had become something more than just talks about trade and treaties. They had become the first move in a much larger game. Sarah did not know exactly how things would unfold, but she knew one thing with certainty. The Valthran government had made a mistake by letting humans into their world. They had assumed that the newcomers would be easy to control. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The opportunity Sarah had been waiting for came during the third week of negotiations. The High Council announced that they would be holding their annual celebration of unity, a public holiday that honored the greatness of the Valthran Empire. All negotiations would pause for 3 days while the celebration took place. The human delegation was invited to attend the main ceremony as honored guests. "This is unusual," Administrator Keth explained, and Sarah noticed that even he seemed surprised by the invitation. "Normally, foreign visitors are kept separate during our celebrations. The High Council must be impressed with your delegation." Sarah thanked him for the honor, but privately she suspected something else was happening. The council wanted to show off their power. They wanted the humans to see the Valthran Empire at its most impressive, and then go home to tell other species how mighty the Valthran were. It was a propaganda opportunity. Sarah intended to use it for something very different. The main ceremony took place in a massive open area in the center of the space station. Thousands of Valthran citizens gathered to watch, carefully separated into sections based on their social class. The elite sat in comfortable seats near the front. The working class stood crowded together in the back, barely able to see. Armed guards stood everywhere, watching the crowd with cold attention. The human delegation was given seats near the front, close to the High Council's viewing platform. Sarah sat quietly and watched as Chancellor Dorth rose to speak. His voice was amplified so that everyone could hear. "Citizens of the Valthran Empire," he said, "today we celebrate our unity, our strength, our glory. For 1,000 years, our great civilization has stood as a light in the darkness of space. We have conquered challenges that would have destroyed lesser peoples. We have built an empire that spans 100 worlds." The crowd responded with cheers, though Sarah noticed that the enthusiasm seemed forced in some sections. The guards watched those areas more closely. "Some would say that our success has come at a cost," Dorth continued. "They whisper that the sacrifices of the many benefit only the few. These lies are spread by enemies who wish to see us fall. But look around you. Look at the glory of our station, the power of our fleet, the order of our society. This is what our system has built. This is what unity can achieve." More cheers, more forced smiles, more guards watching. "Today, we are joined by visitors from a new species called humans. They have come seeking to learn from our greatness. Let us show them what the Valthran Empire truly is." The ceremony continued with displays of military strength, performances of traditional arts, and endless speeches praising the wisdom of the High Council. Sarah watched it all with a calm expression, while her mind worked on the problem before her. When the ceremony paused for a meal break, Sarah saw her chance. She stood and walked toward a group of common citizens who were being served simple food in their crowded section. The guards moved to stop her, but Administrator Keth quickly intervened. "Ambassador, you should stay in the diplomatic area. The common sections are not suitable for honored guests." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, keeping her voice friendly but firm. "But in human culture, we believe that understanding a society means knowing all its people, not just its leaders. I would like to share a meal with some of your citizens if that's acceptable." Keth looked uncomfortable. He glanced toward the High Council's platform, where several members were watching with obvious displeasure. But refusing the request too forcefully would create a scene, and scenes were not good during unity celebrations. "Very well," Keth said reluctantly, "but please be brief." Sarah walked into the common section, her advisors following. The Valthran citizens looked at her with surprise and curiosity. Most of them had never seen a human before, and certainly never expected one to approach them directly. "Hello," Sarah said, speaking clearly so her translation device could work properly. "My name is Sarah. I'm from Earth. Would you mind if I sat with you?" An older Valthran, a female with worn clothing and tired eyes, gestured to an empty space beside her. "Please sit. It is not often that we have such interesting company." Sarah sat down and accepted a bowl of the simple food being served. It tasted bland, but she ate it with genuine appreciation. Around her, Citizens began to gather closer, their curiosity overcoming their caution. "Tell us about your world," a young Valthran asked. "Is it true that humans live on planets instead of stations?" "Yes, most of us live on planets. Our home world is called Earth. It has blue oceans, green forests, and open skies. Most humans see the stars every night just by looking up." The citizens listened with wonder. Many of them had never been to a planet's surface. They had been born on stations and would die on stations, never feeling soil beneath their feet or wind on their skin. "What is your government like?" the older female asked. "Do you have a high council too?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "We have many different governments, actually. Different countries with different systems, but most of them share some common ideas. We believe that governments should serve the people, not the other way around. We believe that leaders should be chosen by the citizens and can be removed if they fail to serve well." Silence fell over the group. These were dangerous ideas, and everyone knew it. Guards were moving closer, trying to hear what was being said. "How is that possible?" the young Valthran asked, his voice low. "How can common people choose their leaders? We would not know how to choose wisely." "That's what we're taught too," said James Park, who had been translating and adding his own thoughts. "We're told that ordinary people can't be trusted with important decisions. But on Earth, we've learned that when people have access to true information and education, they usually make good choices. Not perfect choices, but good enough." "True information," the older female repeated. "That would require knowing what is true and what is not. Here, we only know what we are told." Sarah nodded. "That's a problem in many societies. Information is power, and those in power often want to control it. But truth has a way of finding paths to the surface, eventually." The guards arrived then, politely but firmly ending the conversation. "Ambassador Chen was needed back in the diplomatic section," they said. "She had been away too long." Sarah stood and bowed to the citizens. "Thank you for sharing your food and your time with me. I hope we can talk again." As she walked away, she heard whispers spreading through the common section. Questions were being asked. Ideas were being shared. A small fire had been lit. That evening, Administrator Keth came to see her with a warning. "Ambassador Chen, the High Council is concerned about your behavior today. It is not appropriate for diplomatic guests to interact so closely with common citizens. Such contact could spread dangerous ideas." "What ideas would those be?" Sarah asked innocently. Keth's expression tightened. "The lower classes do not need to hear about how other societies operate. It confuses them. It makes them unhappy with their proper place." "I see," Sarah said. "So the council believes that ignorance keeps people content." "I believe that stability requires certain restrictions. Surely your own species understands this." "We've learned some hard lessons about that, actually. Every time a government tries to control information completely, it eventually fails. The truth always finds a way out. The question is whether the government adapts or gets swept away." Keth stared at her for a long moment. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "Not at all. Just an observation from human history. We've had many empires rise and fall over the centuries. The pattern is remarkably consistent." After Keth left, Maria Rodriguez spoke urgently. "Sarah, we're walking on very thin ice here. If they decide we're a threat, they could expel us or worse." "I know," Sarah said, "but something is already happening. I could feel it in that crowd today. These people are ready for change. They just need to see that change is possible." David Liu looked up from his data pad. "I've been monitoring their internal communications. Security traffic has increased by 40% since the ceremony. They're worried about something." "Good," Sarah said. "Worried governments make mistakes. We just need to be ready when they do." The mistake came sooner than anyone expected. The next morning, the human delegation woke to find armed guards outside their quarters. Administrator Keth arrived with an official summons. The High Council demanded an immediate meeting. "What's happening?" Sarah asked as they walked through corridors that felt tenser than before. "There have been incidents," Keth said, his voice tight. "Citizens in several lower sections have been asking questions. They want to know about human government systems. They want to know why their taxes are so high while the elite live in luxury. The council believes your interactions yesterday sparked this unrest." Sarah kept her face neutral, but inside she felt a mixture of hope and concern. Change was beginning, but the response from the government would determine whether it led somewhere good or somewhere terrible. In the council chamber, all 7 members were present, and their expressions showed anger and fear in equal measure. "Ambassador Chen," Chancellor Dorth said, his voice cold with controlled rage, "you have violated the trust we extended to you. You have spread seditious ideas among our citizens. You have attempted to destabilize our government." Sarah remained calm. "Chancellor, I simply answered questions that your citizens asked me. I told them true things about my own society. If the truth threatens your government, perhaps the problem lies with your government rather than with the truth." The chamber fell completely silent. No one spoke to the High Council that way. No one. "You dare to lecture us?" one of the council members shouted. "You are nothing. Your species is nothing. We will destroy your pathetic delegation and your pathetic planet." "Enough," Dorth said, raising a hand. His voice was quieter now, more dangerous. "Ambassador, you will explain exactly what you told our citizens. You will help us identify which individuals were most affected by your words, and then you will leave Valthran space and never return." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "No." "No," Dorth seemed genuinely surprised. He was not used to that word. "I won't help you punish people for asking questions. I won't help you maintain a system that exploits millions for the benefit of a few. And I won't be threatened by a government that fears the truth more than it fears any external enemy." The council members looked at each other in shock. This was not how diplomacy worked. This was not how weak species behaved toward strong ones. "Guards," Dorth said, "arrest the human delegation. They will be held until we decide what to do with them." The guards moved forward, but Sarah spoke quickly into her communication device. "Captain Martinez, this is Ambassador Chen. Execute Protocol 7. A moment later, the lights in the chamber flickered. Screens around the room activated, showing images and data that the council had never intended for public view. Bank accounts in hidden systems, holding wealth extracted from working citizens. Records of political opponents who had been quietly eliminated. Communications showing how the council manipulated information to keep the population under control. Evidence of deals with criminal organizations. Proof that the external threats the council always warned about were largely manufactured to justify military spending that benefited council members' families. Everything the Valthran government had tried to hide was suddenly visible, not just in this chamber, but across the entire station. David Liu had spent the past week studying their communication systems. When given the signal, the human ship broadcast all the collected evidence through every channel available. Chancellor Dorth's face went pale gray. "What have you done?" "We've done what humans always do when we encounter corruption and injustice," Sarah said. "We've exposed it to the light. Your citizens deserve to know the truth about their leaders." Outside the chamber, chaos was beginning. Citizens who had lived their entire lives believing the official narrative were suddenly seeing proof that everything they had been told was a lie. Some reacted with anger. Some reacted with despair. But many reacted with a determination that had been building for generations, waiting for a moment just like this. The guards in the chamber looked at each other uncertainly. Their loyalty was to the Valthran people, not to corrupt leaders. The evidence on those screens made the choice simple. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. "This isn't over," Dorth said, but his voice had lost its authority. We still control the military. We will restore order." "Will you?" Sarah asked. "Right now, every soldier in your fleet is seeing the same information your citizens are seeing. They're learning how their families have been exploited while you built personal fortunes. How long do you think their loyalty will last?" As if to answer her question, reports began coming in. Military units were refusing orders. Station security forces were standing down. Citizens were gathering in public areas, not in anger but in a kind of shocked awakening. The Valthran Empire, which had stood for 1,000 years through force and fear and lies, was collapsing not from invasion or rebellion, but simply from the weight of truth. In the weeks that followed, change came to the Valthran system faster than anyone had predicted. The High Council was removed from power by their own people, not through violence, but through a mass refusal to recognize their authority any longer. New leaders emerged from the common citizens, people who had never expected to have a voice in their own government. Ambassador Chen and her team stayed to help with the transition, offering advice when asked, but never trying to impose human solutions on Valthran problems. Every species had to find its own way, Sarah believed. The best outsiders could do was shine light into dark places and let the people inside decide what to do. "You've changed our entire world," Administrator Keth told her one day. He had become one of the leaders of the provisional government, transformed from a minor bureaucrat into a voice for reform. "I don't know if I should thank you or hate you for it." "Change is always difficult," Sarah said, "but your people deserve to know the truth about their society. What they do with that truth is up to them." "And what will humans do? Now that you've seen what we were, will you still want relations with us?" Sarah smiled. "We'll want them more than ever. The Valthran Empire was built on corruption and lies. Whatever you build next will be built on truth and the will of your people. That's a much better foundation for friendship." When the human delegation finally left the Valthran system, they carried with them a new treaty, one negotiated with representatives chosen by the common citizens. The terms were fair to both sides, which meant they were very different from what the old council would have demanded. More importantly, they carried a message back to humanity. The galaxy was full of civilizations, and many of them were ruled by fear and lies. Humans were new to this larger community, small and seemingly weak, but they had something that many older species had lost or never developed. They had the ability to see things clearly and the courage to speak the truth, even when it was dangerous. As the human ship jumped into hyperspace, Sarah Chen looked back at the viewscreen showing the Valthran station shrinking in the distance. The celebrations there would continue for days, as people who had never known freedom began to explore what it meant. "Do you think they'll be okay?" James asked, joining her at the window as he had so many times before. "I think they'll have a lot of hard work ahead of them," Sarah said. "Building a new society is never easy, but they have something they didn't have before." "What's that?" "Hope and the truth about their own history. With those two things, people can accomplish almost anything." The ship carried them home, but Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Word would spread through the galaxy about what had happened in the Valthran system. Other oppressed peoples would hear the story and wonder if change was possible for them too. Other corrupt governments would see it as a warning or a threat. Humanity had announced itself to the stars not with weapons or threats, but with something far more powerful. They had shown that truth was a force stronger than any army, and that the courage to speak it could bring down empires. In the end, that was the most human thing of all. Not physical strength or advanced technology, but the stubborn belief that the truth mattered and that ordinary people deserved to know it. That belief had guided human history through dark times and bright ones, through failures and triumphs. Now it would guide humanity among the stars, meeting new civilizations and bringing light wherever they found darkness. The galaxy would never be quite the same. The story of the Valthran system spread through the galaxy faster than any spaceship could travel. Within months, every major civilization had heard about the small human delegation that had walked into a corrupt empire and brought it down without firing a single weapon. The reactions varied widely. Some civilizations viewed humans with new respect. These were mostly societies with democratic traditions, or those that valued truth and openness. They sent diplomatic messages to Earth, expressing interest in forming alliances and trade agreements. They saw humanity as a potential partner in building a better galactic community. Other civilizations reacted with fear. These were the empires built on the same foundations as the Valthran had been, governments that maintained power through control and deception. They saw humanity as a dangerous threat that needed to be contained or destroyed before the infection of truth could spread to their own populations. Ambassador Sarah Chen returned to Earth to find herself famous in ways she had never expected. News channels wanted interviews. Politicians wanted her advice. Universities wanted her to teach. She declined most of the attention and focused instead on preparing for the challenges she knew were coming. "The easy part is over," she told a gathering of Earth's diplomatic corps 3 months after her return. "We've shown the galaxy what humans can do. Now we have to deal with the consequences." The first consequence arrived in the form of a diplomatic delegation from the Crethan Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. The Crethans were a reptilian species that had built their empire over 10,000 years of conquest and manipulation. They ruled dozens of species across hundreds of worlds, and they did not appreciate what humanity had done to the Valthran. The Crethan ambassador was named Vorath, an ancient being whose scales had faded to gray with age but whose eyes still burned with cold intelligence. He met with Sarah in a secure facility on Earth's moon, surrounded by guards from both species. "Ambassador Chen," Vorath said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "you have caused significant disruption to galactic stability. The Valthran were useful to us. Their collapse has created chaos that affects trade routes, security arrangements, and political balances that took generations to establish." "I understand that change can be disruptive," Sarah replied. "But the Valthran government was built on lies and exploitation. It was going to collapse eventually. We simply accelerated a process that was already inevitable." "Nothing is inevitable," Vorath said. "Systems can be maintained indefinitely with proper management. The Crethan Dominion has proved this for 10,000 years. "Has it? I've read reports about conditions in your dominion, poverty rates among subject species, disappearances of political dissidents, control of information that makes the Valthran look like amateurs. How long do you think your system can last if your people learn the truth about how it works?" Vorath's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Ambassador?" "No, it's a question. The same question that governments like yours have to face eventually. Do you adapt to the changing expectations of your people, or do you try to hold back the tide until it overwhelms you?" The meeting ended without resolution, but Sarah knew it was only the first of many difficult conversations to come. The Crethans would not attack Earth directly. Humanity's story had spread too far for that. Any aggression against the species that had peacefully liberated the Valthran would unite other civilizations against the aggressor. But there were other ways to cause harm, and the Crethans had practiced them for thousands of years. The first attack came not as weapons but as information. Crethan agents began spreading stories through galactic networks, tales of human history designed to undermine humanity's moral authority. They talked about Earth's wars, its genocides, its long history of exploitation and oppression. They pointed out that humans had once kept slaves, had built empires, had committed terrible acts against each other and against the planet that gave them birth. The stories were true, and that was what made them dangerous. "They're trying to show that we're no better than they are," James Park explained during a strategy meeting. If they can convince the galaxy that humans are hypocrites, then our message loses its power. Sarah nodded. What's our response? Some officials want to deny or minimize our history. Focus on the positive, downplay the negative. That would be a mistake, Sarah said firmly. We can't fight lies with more lies. Our strength comes from being willing to tell the truth, even when it hurts. The human response to the Crethan campaign was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of denial or deflection, humanity acknowledged its history openly. Educational programs were broadcast throughout galactic networks, showing the full story of human civilization with all its darkness and light. Yes, humans had kept slaves, but they had also fought a terrible war to end slavery and had spent generations working to heal the wounds it left behind. Yes, humans had committed genocides, but they had also created international systems to prevent such horrors and to punish those who attempted them. Yes, humans had damaged their own planet, but they had also learned from those mistakes and were working to restore what had been lost. The message was not that humans were perfect. The message was that humans were capable of recognizing their own failures and learning from them. They could look at the worst parts of their history honestly and work to do better. That capacity for self-examination and growth was itself a kind of strength. You show your wounds to the galaxy, Voreth said during their second meeting, his voice carrying something that might have been confusion or respect. This is not how power works. Leaders must appear strong and infallible. That's one theory, Sarah said. Another theory is that true strength comes from honesty. A leader who can admit mistakes is stronger than one who has to maintain an illusion of perfection. The illusion can be shattered by a single truth. Honest self-assessment cannot be shattered by anything. And you believe other species will accept this philosophy? I believe they already are. Look at what's happening across the galaxy. She was right. In the months since the Valthran collapse, reform movements had begun emerging on dozens of worlds. Citizens who had accepted their lot under authoritarian governments were starting to ask questions. They were sharing information through networks that had once been tightly controlled. They were organizing in ways that their leaders had never anticipated. Not all of these movements would succeed. Some would be crushed by governments willing to use whatever force was necessary. But the pattern was clear. Something had changed in the galactic consciousness. The idea that ordinary people could demand better from their governments was spreading like a fire that could not be contained. The Crethan Dominion faced a choice. They could double down on repression, using their vast military to crush any signs of dissent within their borders. Or they could try something different, something that their history had never prepared them for. Ambassador Voreth appeared on Earth once more, but this time his manner was different. The cold confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. Ambassador Chen, he said, the Crethan Dominion requests your assistance. Sarah kept her surprise hidden. What kind of assistance? Our Dominion is experiencing instability. Citizens on several worlds have begun demanding reforms. Our traditional methods of managing such situations are proving ineffective. The more we try to control the information, the more it spreads. The more we punish dissidents, the more martyrs we create. And you want humanity to help you crush these movements. No, Voreth paused, and Sarah realized she was watching an ancient being struggle with concepts that contradicted everything he had ever known. We want humanity to help us understand them, to find a path forward that does not lead to collapse or civil war. It was, Sarah realized, the most human request she had ever heard from an alien. That will require fundamental changes to how your Dominion operates, she said carefully. Not just reforms around the edges, but real transformation of the relationship between your government and your people. We understand. We have studied your own history. The transition will be difficult and dangerous. Many of our leaders will resist. Some of our subject species may seek revenge for past wrongs. We may face violence and chaos before we find stability again. Then why do it? Why not simply try harder to maintain control? Voreth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Because we have seen the alternative. The Valthran tried to maintain control and they lost everything. We have 10,000 years of history, Ambassador. We do not wish to see it end in ruins. Sarah nodded slowly. Helping you will be controversial. Many humans will say we should let the Crethan Dominion fall, that your people deserve whatever happens after 10,000 years of oppression. And what do you say? I say that revenge and justice are not the same thing. Real justice means building something better for the future, not just punishing the past. If the Crethan Dominion is willing to change, then helping that change succeed serves justice better than watching it burn. The partnership between humanity and the Crethan Dominion was announced 6 months later, shocking the galaxy. The ancient empire would begin a gradual process of democratization, with human advisors helping to design new institutions and manage the transition. Subject species would be given paths to self-governance or full citizenship. Information controls would be loosened carefully, allowing truth to spread while preventing the chaos that could come from too much change too quickly. It was a massive undertaking, one that would take generations to complete. There would be setbacks and failures along the way. Some worlds would descend into violence before finding peace. Some Crethan leaders would resist change and have to be dealt with. The path forward would be difficult and uncertain. But it was a path forward, and that was what mattered. Ambassador Sarah Chen was asked to serve as the lead human advisor to the Crethan transition, a role that would require her to spend years away from Earth, working on problems that had no easy solutions. Why do you keep doing this? James Park asked her before she left. You could stay home. You've already done more than anyone could have expected. Why keep pushing? Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about the galaxy full of civilizations that were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Some of them were ready for change. Some were terrified of it. All of them were affected by what humanity did and said. Because this is what humans do, she said. We see problems and we try to fix them. We see suffering and we try to help. We see lies and we try to speak truth. It's not always smart. It's not always safe, but it's who we are. Even when it means risking everything. Especially then. The easy thing would be to focus on our own interests, to build walls around our civilization and let the rest of the galaxy sort itself out. But that's not why we reached for the stars in the first place. We wanted to explore, to discover, to connect with others who look up at the night sky and wonder what's out there. Now that we've found them, we have a responsibility to be the best version of ourselves. James smiled. The aliens never stood a chance, did they? They thought they were dealing with a weak young species. Instead, they got humanity. They got truth, Sarah said. They got the idea that ordinary people matter and that governments serve at the will of the governed. They got the belief that change is possible and that the future doesn't have to look like the past. Those ideas are more powerful than any weapon ever built. She boarded her ship and left for Crethan space, carrying nothing but the same tools she had always used. Honesty, courage, the stubborn human conviction that things could be better. Behind her, Earth continued on its own path, growing and changing and reaching ever further into the cosmos. Ahead of her, the Crethan Dominion waited, an ancient empire standing at the threshold of transformation. And throughout the galaxy, billions of beings watched to see what would happen next. Their eyes turned toward the small blue world that had sent its children out among the stars to speak truth to power. Humanity had found its place in the universe, not as conquerors or servants, but as something far more powerful. They were the ones who asked questions, the ones who demanded better, the ones who refused to accept that the way things were was the way they had to be. That was the human story, and it was only beginning. 10 years passed since humanity first made contact with the Valthran system. In that decade, the galaxy transformed in ways that historians would struggle to describe adequately. What had started as a simple diplomatic mission had become something that some called a revolution and others called an awakening. The Crethan Dominion completed its transition to a constitutional federation, with elected representatives from all member species sharing power. The process had been difficult, marked by several small civil conflicts and one assassination attempt against the Reform Council. But the ancient empire survived, reshaped into something its founders would never have recognized. Other civilizations followed similar paths. Some chose democracy. Others developed different systems that fit their own cultures and needs. The common thread was not any particular form of government, but a fundamental shift in the relationship between rulers and ruled. Across the galaxy, the idea had taken root that governments existed to serve their people, not the other way around. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood on a balcony overlooking the new Galactic Forum, a space station built through cooperation between dozens of species to serve as a neutral ground for diplomacy and dialogue. She was older now, her hair showing gray at the temples, but her eyes remained as sharp and determined as ever. "They want to name this place after you," James Park said, joining her on the balcony. He had aged too, though he still moved with the energy of someone half his years. "The Chen Forum has a nice ring to it." Sarah shook her head. "I've told them no. This place belongs to everyone. Naming it after one person would miss the point entirely." "Stubborn as ever." "Consistent, I prefer to say." Below them, the main chamber was filling with representatives from across the known galaxy. The opening session of the First Galactic Assembly would begin soon, a gathering of species that had once been enemies or strangers, now coming together to discuss their shared future. "When we started," Sarah said quietly, "I never imagined it would lead to this. I thought we were just trying to establish trade relations and maybe help one oppressed population. I didn't expect to change the entire galaxy." "You didn't change it alone. Millions of beings on thousands of worlds made choices that brought us here. You just lit the first spark." "The truth lit the spark. We just gave it fuel." The Galactic Assembly began with an unexpected speaker. A young Valthran named Surith, who had been a child during the collapse of the old empire, took the podium to address the gathered representatives. She had been chosen to give the opening remarks because she represented the generation that had grown up in the new era, the ones who would carry it forward. "Distinguished representatives," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment, "I stand before you as proof that change is possible. 10 years ago, I was born into a system that would have determined my entire life before I took my first breath. I would have worked where I was told, lived where I was assigned, believed what I was told to believe. I never would have known there was any other way." She paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of different species watching her. "Then strangers came from a distant world. They didn't conquer us. They didn't threaten us. They simply told the truth about what we had become and let us decide what to do about it. That truth was painful. Learning it caused chaos and suffering. Some of my people did not survive the transition, but those of us who did are free now in ways our ancestors could never have imagined." Surith turned to where the human delegation sat, her eyes finding Sarah Chen. "Humanity showed us that the universe was bigger than we knew, not in terms of space or stars, but in terms of possibility. They showed us that the way things were did not have to be the way they remained. They showed us that ordinary people, given truth and opportunity, could reshape their own destiny." She returned her attention to the full assembly. "That is why we gather here today. Not because any one species has conquered or united us through force, but because we have all chosen to build something together. A forum for truth. A place where any voice can be heard and any question can be asked. A community where the smallest species has the same rights as the largest." The chamber erupted in applause, a sound made strange by the many different ways the assembled species expressed approval. Some clapped like humans, some whistled or clicked or hummed. The result was a symphony of acceptance that no single species could have created alone. When order returned, the business of the assembly began. There were trade agreements to negotiate, territorial disputes to mediate, and 1,000 other matters that came with trying to build a functional galactic community. The work would be difficult and endless. Progress would come slowly when it came at all. But the assembly existed, and that simple fact represented a victory that Sarah still struggled to fully appreciate. A decade ago, she had walked into a corrupt government's headquarters with no weapons except words and no plan except to tell the truth. Now she was watching representatives of 100 different species work together toward a common future. As the session continued, Sarah noticed a figure approaching through the crowd. It was Vorath, the ancient Crethan ambassador who had been one of her most unlikely allies. His scales had lightened further with age, but he moved with surprising energy for a being several centuries old. "Ambassador Chen," he said, settling into the seat beside her. "A historic day." "One of many, I hope. How are things in the former Dominion?" "Complicated as always. Some territories are thriving under the new system. Others are struggling to adapt. We lost 3 planets to civil unrest last year, though 2 of them have since stabilized. And the Crethan people themselves." Vorath was quiet for a moment. "We are learning. It is strange, after so many generations of absolute certainty, to be uncertain. To know that our way of doing things was not the only way, perhaps not even the best way. The young ones adapt easily. For those of us who grew up under the old system, it is more difficult. But worth it." "Yes." He said the word with conviction that surprised even him. "I have seen things in these past years that I never thought possible. Crethan citizens debating their government openly, subject species serving as equals in our councils, children growing up without fear of the security ministry. These things have value that cannot be measured." Sarah smiled. "That's probably the most human thing I've ever heard you say." "Perhaps humans are contagious," Vorath replied, and she was surprised to hear humor in his ancient voice. "Your way of seeing the universe seems to spread wherever you go." "It's not our way, it's just the truth. We're just stubborn enough to keep saying it out loud." The assembly continued for 3 more days, producing agreements that would shape galactic policy for years to come. A framework for peaceful resolution of territorial disputes, standards for the treatment of intelligent species by governments, mechanisms for sharing information and preventing the kind of controlled ignorance that had enabled so much oppression in the past. None of it was perfect. There were compromises and loopholes and provisions that satisfied no one completely, but the framework existed, and that meant it could be improved over time. On the final day, Sarah gave her own address to the assembly. She spoke without notes, letting the words come from years of experience and observation. "When humans first ventured beyond our own solar system, we carried a lot of uncertainty about what we would find. We wondered if other species would be friendly or hostile, advanced or primitive, similar to us or utterly alien. What we found was all of those things and more. The universe is far more diverse and complicated than our imaginations had prepared us for." She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes of every shape and color. "But we also found something we hadn't expected. We found that despite all our differences, intelligent species tend to want the same basic things: safety, opportunity, truth, connection with others, the chance to build something meaningful and to leave the universe a little better than we found it. These common desires don't make conflict impossible. They don't prevent misunderstanding or exploitation or oppression. History is full of beings who ignored the needs of others to serve their own interests. But these common desires do make cooperation possible. They give us a foundation to build on, if we choose to build." Humanity's contribution to this project has been simple, even if its effects have been profound. We brought truth, not always popular truth, not always comfortable truth, but honest observation of what we saw and willingness to share that observation even when it was dangerous. That is all we can offer. We cannot force any species to change. We cannot liberate anyone who does not choose liberation for themselves. We can only be who we are, a young species still learning from our own mistakes, trying to grow into something better, and stubborn enough to believe that what is possible for us might be possible for others too. She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. The road ahead will be long. There will be setbacks and failures and moments when this entire project seems doomed. There will be species that reject what we're building here and try to tear it down. There will be times when each of us wonders if it's worth the effort. When those times come, remember this moment. Remember that beings from 100 different worlds with 100 different histories chose to come together in pursuit of something better. Remember that change is possible because we have seen it happen. Remember that truth is stronger than any empire built on lies. And remember that you are not alone. Whatever challenges you face, whatever obstacles stand in your way, there are others who share your goals and will stand with you. That is what this assembly represents. Not a government or an alliance, but a community, a family in the truest sense. The applause that followed lasted for several minutes. When it finally faded, the assembly adjourned, and the representatives began the long journey back to their home worlds. Sarah stayed behind, watching the chamber empty, thinking about all the work that remained to be done. The galaxy was far from peaceful. Conflicts continued on many fronts. Oppressive governments still held power on thousands of worlds. The progress of the past decade could still be reversed if the coalition that had built it fell apart. But standing there in the empty chamber, Sarah felt something that had been rare in her years of struggle. She felt hope. Not blind optimism. Not certainty that everything would work out, but genuine hope that the future could be better than the past, and that the choices made by individuals like herself actually mattered. James found her there an hour later, still staring at the empty podium. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. Earth was home in some ways, but so was this station, and so were all the worlds she had visited and the people she had met across the galaxy. "Not quite yet," she said. "I heard there's a situation developing in the outer reach, a planet whose government is trying to crack down on reform movements. Might need someone to go have a diplomatic conversation with them." James laughed. "You're 60 years old, Sarah. Don't you ever get tired?" "I'll rest when the work is done." "The work will never be done." "Then I'll rest when I'm dead. Until then, there are people who need help and truths that need telling. That's what humans do, remember." She walked out of the chamber, already planning her next mission. Behind her, the lights dimmed as the station shifted to night cycle, but the work she had dedicated her life to continued across 1,000 worlds. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a young alien looked up at unfamiliar stars and wondered if things could be different. Somewhere, a corrupt official felt the first stirrings of fear as their citizens began asking questions. Somewhere, a message of hope passed from one being to another, spreading like fire through dry grass. Humanity had changed the galaxy, not through conquest or technology, but through something far more powerful. They had shown that truth mattered, that ordinary people mattered, that the future was not fixed by the past. That was the human story, the one that would be told for millennia to come. Not a story of kings and empires, but of stubborn individuals who refused to accept that the way things were was the way they had to be. And in all the vast universe, there was nothing more powerful than that simple, stubborn refusal. The stars watched, as they always had, but now they watched a galaxy awakening. And the small blue world that had started it all continued to send its children outward, carrying nothing but words and truth, and the unshakable conviction that things could always be better. That was humanity's gift to the cosmos. That was humanity's legacy. That was, in the end, what it meant to be human among the stars.